Help support this channel and get early access to videos plus exclusive content and patrons-only live discussions by becoming a member at patreon.com/BrucePoinsett. Welcome back to the Working Artist Working Title Project. I'm your host, Bruce Poinsett, and today I speak with Barbie Wu. Barbie teaches acting, directing, and text analysis at Reed College and is heavily involved in the theater world in Portland. You may have seen her in such shows as The Chinese Lady or Today Is My Birthday, Better Maybe, or A Doll's House Part 2, among many others. As a scholar, she focuses on elevating the work of BIPOC and queer playwrights and engaging her students in the work of underrepresented people in the theater community. So Barbie and I actually go back to University of Oregon, and so I've known her since watching her and doing plays, on campus, which we talk about in the interview, as well as just talking about what is it like as an artist of color trying to make the work you want to see, both the challenges you might think of in terms of just underrepresentation, but then also, the logistics and the mechanics of it. So it's a very interesting conversation, very enlightening. I think you're going to enjoy it. Check it out. So Barbie, thank you for talking with me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. As of recording this, I'm still in COVID recovery, so
Right.
could be better, but I'm feeling as good as it can be.
That's good. I mean, it's going to take a little bit, but just remember to rest and stay hydrated.
Yeah, I know we were talking off camera. You've
Yeah.
also gone through it and kind of put it in perspective. Like, yeah, it takes
Yeah, it takes
time.
time. Yeah.
So,
A
you know,
friend
for
of mine was like, it's gonna take about 3 weeks. And I was like, 3 weeks? And it took about 3 weeks. Yeah. So
yeah, and that kind of like ties into what we're talking about today, as far as just like one being a working artist and having really a roadblock like a pandemic in
mhm,
there is it's real. But
right.
yeah, for the people viewing at home, we actually, we go way back, as the kids say,
Yeah.
down to University of Oregon. You moved from Taiwan to Eugene
Mhm,
in 2003, correct?
mhm. Yep. Very good memory.
Yeah, yeah. Can you just talk about one, what kind of like sparked your motivation to, what sparked your interest in theater, but then also just, making that transition in general? Because I feel like, I haven't been to Taiwan, but I imagine the vibe is just a little bit different than Eugene. Just
Yeah. The vibe is super different, right? So I was born and raised in Taiwan. I was 17 years old when I came as an exchange student, and it was really supposed to be like a 1 year deal, right? Like I was going to take a year of absence from my high school at the time and come and be an exchange student, and I was going to go back and repeat that year that I missed and eventually finish that degree back home. But about like a month into my time in the States, one of the it was like the academic advisor, or I think she was the vice principal at the time. She was helping me pick my classes. She suggested, do you want to take an acting class? And I was like, oh yeah, that sounds fun. I didn't know. I was like,
mm,
sure. I didn't think that would ever be a thing. And also back home, like acting classes in my school just wasn't a thing. And I loved it. I felt like this is the first thing in my life I've ever understood. Like everything made sense to me about acting. Um, and I called my parents and told them that I wanted to be a theater major and I wanted to stay in the States and go to school to study acting. And they freaked out big time because my very wonderful and forward-thinking Taiwanese parents were still worried about me pursuing art as a living because it's and a career because it's terrifying. It's precarious. We don't really know what being an artist means. in Taiwan or in the States, and also being an Asian woman in the States pursuing acting. It was like my dad is like, where are you gonna act? There's only one Sandra Oh, because like at the time there's like maybe Lucy Liu and Sandra Oh. Michelle Yeoh hasn't really like landed a whole lot of roles
Mhm.
consistently in Hollywood cinema yet. Um, and I think their idea of an actor was a little skewed too. It's more like what they see on TV and screens, and they were like, no, but nobody looks like you up there, so what are you gonna do?
Mm.
Um, yeah, and it was a big shift. I accidentally went to a lot of religious schools when I was little. Religion wasn't like ever a big part of my life. My family was not religious when I was growing up. We have a lot of Taiwanese customs are more tied to the Buddhist practices, but my family is not religious. But I went to like a Christian kindergarten because my parents went to that Christian university, and I think only the alum can register their children into that kindergarten. So that's weird. And I went to a Catholic high school. Um, Nothing against religion. I was just kind of like I kind of fell into that. So coming to the States and going to North Eugene High School was kind of like, whoa, everything they said in the movie is kind of true. Because I like exited a classroom, right? And I was like 17, pretty freshly in the States. And I saw these two students making out like by the lockers. And I was kind of like, what? Like because in my high school, like you couldn't even hold hands without a teacher yelling at you, saying like, whoa, 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 like you can't. And we had to wear uniforms and all that stuff. So it just felt so different. Like the given circumstances of all the students and teachers, or like the relationship of the power dynamic between teachers and students were really different too. There's like a certain amount of respect, but it's not like it doesn't feel as drastic as like the power dynamic back home. Um, yeah. So that's
Mm.
I just accidentally fell into acting, and I found what I wanted to do, and my parents were not supportive at first because they were worried.
Yeah, I'm just curious because as we're talking about this, I believe the Oscars are in like what
June,
week and a
yeah.
half, something like that. And
Mhm.
there's a record number of nominations for Asian actors. And I'm just curious, like, if your family is kind of, in light of sort of like recent years, seeing like, oh, kind of like see the light, or if it's
I
still
mean, I don't know if they feel that, maybe. But I think they just want to make sure I'm okay, that I
right.
would have a sustainable lifestyle. Um, I I don't know. And also like my goal as an artist is not to become a famous what, like famous actor or anything
Mhm.
like that. I feel like it's more important for my work to have an impact in this community that I'm in, a positive impact, and making sure that actors that look like me or actors that feel like they have a similar path as me feel like they have a fighting chance in the industry, right? And feel like they can have support and mentorship from people that look like them, that isn't just asking them to fit into a mold that wasn't created for them in the first place. Um, that's what I want to strive towards.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to take it, stay in Eugene just for a bit, because
Hmm.
like around the time we met, one of the I see some of your work at U of O acting school, and one of the ones that just like sticks with me is I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but it was like the car play where basically like you had like a parking lot, and you'd go as audience members would basically like, go to different cars, and you'd have a couple actors doing a whole scene in each car, and it was like I didn't know, just as a non-theater person, I was like, I didn't know you could do this with theater and whatnot. So it's kind of like homage, but like I'm curious as far as like if there are any like particular roles or any like early productions that really were just like this is this is it for me, like really just kind of like I don't know, just kind of like lit your fire, if that makes sense.
Uh, I think the most memorable one is probably I only did one main stage production my 2 years at the U of O. It's called Burning Vision. and it's about the Second World War and how it impacts both the Native community and also the folks in Japan after the two bombs were dropped. Um, and it's super intense. Like it's a pretty intense play in all the ways you can imagine. But it's a very ensemble heavy piece. And it was such a great ensemble. And I feel like our director, Dr. Theresa May, cared so much about the production. It just felt very special. That group of people I think about constantly. And the designers that were involved. There is just so much love putting into that production. And the one that I had the most fun in was a show called Billy Goat's Gruff that was created by Rebecca Morris at the time. Now her name is Rebecca Williams, and Kathleen Leary and a bunch of other folks that it's kind of like a brainchild of theirs. It's more of a device, sort of a device theater piece, like talking about how some of the modern lyrics at the time, is really damaging in the way young people think about relationship. Like the song Bedrock was mentioned in the play, just how like sometimes these pop cultural lyric references are have really bad boundaries, and how they treat certain folks is just not okay. And I got to play a bridge troll and I had a lot of fun. And I don't think my role was even there to begin with, but they really enjoyed my audition, so they just plugged me in and I didn't have a whole lot of lines, but I got to be really weird and have crazy makeup and, very like clowny makeup and really kind of grotesque looking costumes. And I loved it. It was just so much fun. There was a bunch of really sweaty people creating a show that we really loved. And we all sang Bad Romance, which was like probably not legal. Who knows? Maybe. We were singing it, so maybe it's okay. Copyrights is blurry when you're in an education setting sometimes.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And you know, I was, leading up to this, I was kind of just thinking about some like the parallels between, what we do. I was mean like writing and kind of more in like the media field, you in theater production, and how even just with like, being at like U of O and having like a lot of our peers going off to, places like California, New York, or some of these like other kind of like quote unquote, well not quote unquote, but like actually, bigger markets, kind of bigger areas. But yeah, what was kind of your motivation for staying in Oregon and specifically coming into sort of like the theater community in Portland?
That's a great question. I don't think I will ever be financially stable enough to live in either New York or LA. I also don't enjoy driving all the time. Like if I have to be stuck in traffic, like at least 30 minutes to 2 hours at a day, that would drive me literally bonkers. So I just don't think I can deal with that lifestyle. And New York, even though it has so much stimulation and I love the way I feel in New York, it also makes me feel so lonely. It's the one city where you're surrounded by so many people, but you feel so alone, or at least I feel so alone when I'm there. So I don't know if I can really thrive in these two places. And I know that there's Chicago, there's Milwaukee and Atlanta and all these beautiful cities. And I I feel like what drew me about Portland initially was this theater company that I'm a resident artist for called Artist Repertory Theater. And when I look at their season, I get very excited about the stories that they're wanting to tell because it's not just the status quo of, oh, they do their Tennessee Williams or they do their Arthur Miller. There isn't like any shade about these playwrights. It's just more, they're more contemporary stories that also needs to be told. And I feel like they're focusing on that too. And I just, I find, especially as an artist of color in Portland, I find what I choose to do as an artist paints a narrative of who I am to the general public that doesn't know me. And I'm very selective with what I do because I think I I can't control what other people think of me, right? So I feel like the narrative that I'm choosing to paint is more important that way. That makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. And that kind of gets to one of the like big topics I really wanted to talk with you about as far as just like, using your platform to specifically, I don't want big through lines for the work you've been doing. It's just like trying to elevate playwrights of color, queer playwrights. I can talk, but
Yeah, yeah.
you know, and obviously, like in a place, especially a place like Oregon, that can present, there can be a number of challenges in that, but also I look at it like a double edged sword. Is like there's an opportunity for all these stories that are just not being told, and people when they get the chance to experience them. Like I think about I went to see the Chinese lady at Portland Armory, and it wasn't
That was
just like
Artist Rep's production, yeah, but it was
yeah,
inside the armory, yeah.
yeah, and like not just the stage play itself, but then you have this whole like museum like display, and you have this whole sort of like experience. Again, it's not just seeing the same the same three stage plays that everyone who isn't in theater knows. Yeah, can you just talk a little bit about kind of one just like what goes into even for just like going into that's what I'm looking for, just kind of like cutting through, trying to get past doing the traditional stuff, but just like for those who don't know, like how much it goes into just production beyond just like casting, but also, like logistic costs, marketing, trying to like cut through the noise. Cause I just imagine like when it comes to like putting things on, there's just so many challenges. So yeah, can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, thank you for asking about that. Um, so Artist Repertory Theater was the theater company that had reached out to me about doing the Chinese Lady. They were putting together their 2019 to 2020 season. So like our typical season normally looks like you start rehearsing for a show in around August, and your first show is around like September, October, and the season ends around May-ish, or sometimes it goes all the way to June. So our season is already kind of like different than it looks more like a school year season than like a normal calendar year, right? And that season was also the first season Artist Rep had to move out of its home theater because the theater was going through some renovation, some reimagining. So adding a piece, a two-hander piece, which is just means like two actors are in this play, to this current season was going to be a $50,000 deficit. So we ended up having to table the Chinese Lady to the next season, which would have been the 2021 season. And we all know what happened to that season.
Mm.
Uh, and I think at one point, the theater company was thinking about maybe doing uh, like a filmed version of the Chinese Lady. And we were in conversation with the playwright, and the playwright felt like there is that very important aspect of the play where Afang Moy stares back at the audience, gazes back at the audience that he feels like would be lost if it was in a film format. And he doesn't feel like the impact is quite the same. And I really respect that. I think he is willing to let go of some financial support of this theater company, during the earlier on of the pandemic, to say that I don't want my work compromised because I feel like the story deserves a better outcome. And I really have a lot of respect for artists that are like that. I think sometimes we compromise our values because a paycheck is a paycheck. And I just really respect Lloyd choosing not to do that. So we finally were able to produce the show in 2021, 2022 season. And that was difficult because when we were rehearsing the Chinese Lady, that was when Delta was happening, the Delta variant for COVID. So a lot of people didn't feel comfortable coming back to the theater. Not that our theater work ever stopped, but a lot of our in-person performances were suspended until November of 2021. And even then, we had very small houses because people's trepidation about seeing a live show. in a closed space with other people, masks aren't 100% proof, and also we have older patrons too, feeling like it could kill me if I contract COVID. This was also kind of in the beginning of the first dose of that vaccine being distributed to people. Um, yeah, but it's really hard and trying to figure out how to market this show when there had just been a lot more visibility on how the Asian communities have been affected by COVID, with a lot of anti-Asian hate and hate crimes that are happening in broad daylight, and like atrocious deeds happening to the Asian communities. Um, but I decided that I was going to push for an Asian and Pacific Islander affinity night. We ended up having two, which we call the highlight nights for the show, because I feel like the Chinese lady is also a beautiful love letter to the Asian community. I think it is saying that we see you, we see what you have been going through, and we're here for you, and we're here to witness and to celebrate your challenges, or your perseverance. Or not like celebrate their challenges, but more like celebrate the way they overcame. Um, yeah, so I was able to partner with quite a few organizations in town. I went to meet with Portland Chinatown Museum, which they brought a lot of their staff members and also their members to come see the shows. We had one performance I was dedicated to that organization, and I will also partner with Lansu Chinese Garden and an amazing restaurant in town. They had a storefront at the time called Jade Rabbit. They were very gracious in offering us 3 really generous gift cards for kind of like a raffle. So when the API community comes together, we can celebrate and be like, oh, they're surprised for coming to the show because you're here and we wanted to celebrate you. So that was really, really special. And the plays, the 2 performances where we had mostly Asian audience felt so different. I don't know if you remember that one part where Tang was acting as Andrew Jackson and
Mhm.
asking to touch Avon Moy's foot. Like throughout the run, I would hear chuckles because people are uncomfortable about that, right? Like that's a really weird thing to ask. But
Right.
the first API performance, nobody laughed. There was just a very clear understanding of, oh my God, what is she going to do? Because this is the leader of the United States. Can she refuse? And also, how dare he to ask to do such a deed? And I felt so loved and held by the community that night. It felt incredible. Yeah. And I would never forget that moment.
Yeah, that's you just get to another aspect of just expression, honestly, in general, where it's not just creating stories that, again, creating new contemporary stories, but also being able to like do it for like, I mean, I guess it feels like the underlying challenge of, again, just so much of doing art in Portland and Oregon is like, so how can I sell this to a white audience? Basically, it
Yeah.
like it's always, whether it's spoken or not, it's always there. And being able to like have those nights, having a night for your community to enjoy it together, that's, I don't know. It sounds cliche to be like you can't put a price on that, but I don't know. I just think about so many, like when you talk about that moment with Andrew Jackson, and like I think this is a weird comparison as I'm saying it in my mind, but we're gonna go with it here. Is I remember going to see The Help with my parents in theaters whenever that came out, and there's just like some like I didn't really like that movie like that or anything, but there was just this random moment where what was it? It was something like it was so like black something like it wasn't a joke line, it wasn't anything, but it was just a random line and just this audience like Bridgeport just started bursting out laughing. And it was like, this is this is so weird, and I don't I don't know how to like, categorize whatever is happening right now, but like, oh, these moments. So yeah, when you just again, it's a weird comparison to the
No, no,
Chinese lady, but
no. I think you're completely on the point though, like it's when the audience has the cultural competency in what you're talking about, it feels
mhm,
completely different, right? Like when they share a cultural understanding or a historic background or some sort of lived experience, it feels different.
right.
Yeah. There's a very clear understanding of I wouldn't laugh at that. That joke is not for you, right? Like I yeah,
Mhm.
I hear what you're saying though.
And it just kind of gets to the other, like, just such a need again throughout Oregon as far as like, community spaces or culturally specific community spaces, places where people can actually build community, build relationships with each other, just like without, again, sort of that specter of we have to entertain white people, we have to, make profit for white people to happen. But like you said, you had to, it's something you have to lobby for constantly. Like I'm not, I know there's like partnerships and stuff, so I don't want to, get too deep into the weeds of that. But it's just like, again, is that I imagine it's just like a constant challenge to a get just these productions going in general, but then to like say, you know, we want to do this affinity night. We want to do two affinity nights. And it's like it's always an uphill battle, it feels like.
Yeah, and I think maybe we just need to imagine it differently, right?
Mhm.
Because when you say BIPOC Affinity Night, ultimately I see a bunch of white audience in the crowd and I get super frustrated because I feel like if there is ever a specific group that's being celebrated, I would respect that boundary, right? And I
Right.
think maybe the way to combat that is not to say, hey, you can't come, but then maybe block out those performances where people cannot purchase tickets, right? Where
Mhm.
the theater company is making direct outreach to a specific group of people saying, these are the tickets we're offering you because we want you there. We want you to be with us, right? And I mean, like, yes, everybody needs to make money, I guess, in this capitalistic society, right? And in what we do. But having two performances where most of our tickets are given away shouldn't tank the entire show,
Right.
especially if you're trying to make space for that community to feel like there's a there's a reason for us to partake in this form of art, right? I feel like we shouldn't gatekeep art in any way. Art is for the people. Art is political. Everybody's a political, right? Like everything we do is political. You can't just separate it from an individual because I think every statement you make has a point of view that ultimately ties to how you view the world. Yeah, so that's something that I've been thinking about. I get very, very frustrated at BIPOC affinity shows when I see the people taking up the most space not being the people that are the events are for.
Right. And and all these, because just doing a bunch of like, equity DEI work, you know, the goal that's always, well, I shouldn't say the goal that's always highlighted, but the goal that usually if you at least have competent people there is like we want to actually like serve these different communities, serve different communities of color, serve different underrepresented groups. But again, what happens like in action? Because you know, brings bring productions directly to the people. Like, yes, it does take intentionality. It does take maybe doing some things that are like non-traditional, but we say this is what we want to do. We should be willing to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
Otherwise, your mission statement is empty, right?
Mhm.
Otherwise, like, what are you doing? If this is not actually the work we're wanting to commit to, we're just making an empty land acknowledgement, right? This is also like
Right.
things we do a lot in theaters, like, and I do understand land acknowledgement is starting to feel emptier and emptier each time a theater or a space does it.
Mhm.
But I also see the importance in that, where that has to be the starting point, right? And also saying that these are the tangible ways we are contributing or making sure that the Native communities are just as robust as before, right? That we're bringing them in as we tell our next stories, that they have some stake in what we produce. How do we make what we do sustainable? How do we make the people feel like they can sustain their living doing what they do? And the land to still hold all the people here accountable and, also treating it kindly.
Yeah. It also kind of makes me think about, just being in school back in the day. And again, we talk about kind of like the traditional, plays when we would go to the theater is to see like the Phantom of the Opera and, you know, again, the same three things. I'm curious as far as like when you're in, the thick of production, as far as like how those collaborations happen, or if, they happen for, again, not, for contemporary plays, like not for when they happen for contemporary plays, like through are schools reaching out, or like how do you talk about partnerships to get the Chinese lady out there to do like an affinity night, like in order to just like make that happen, like who is it on? Is it just like on the production company to like make the magic, or what?
That's such a good question. And I had to do a lot of the work because I was the education manager at the time for Artist Rep. I was a staff member. Um, and I was one of two staff members of East Asian descent. So I felt like since it was my project, I wanted to take it on. And I was also the creative producer for the show for the Chinese lady. So I feel like that would fulfill my duty as a creative producer. It did add a lot of strain to my bandwidth while trying to do a show, because so much of it had to happen while I'm about to open a show. Um, but I did have a lot of support from my fellow staff members. A lot of junior staff members really help make the affinity nights incredible. And yeah, they were super thoughtful and really kind and they went above and beyond to help me figure out the logistics of the two events post production. And yeah, I think it does have to rest on the theater though, right? Like if the theater is the one making the money, if the theater is the one making the mission statement, then the theater has to be the one responsible for actually doing the work of community outreach. And what does that mean, right? You can't just reach it and then say like our work is done. You can't just be, oh, we send them an email and we invited them to come.
Mhm.
If they don't feel comfortable, if they don't feel safe coming to this place, then you need to figure out, okay, do we have a budget to figure out a form of transportation to get people to come to the theater? Or can we have safe walkers to help walk these community members back to their cars, right? Because the Pearl is not always safe. Also, like for the Asian community, if they're feeling like if there are a lot of us in one place, maybe they'll get targeted. There are a lot of fear, like then and now, right? And how do we make people feel safe without saying that this is a safe space? Because I think that's the
Mhm.
most empty statement ever, right? Like this is a safe space. Like whenever people say that, I immediately feel unsafe. I feel like they're going to do something to me.
Mhm.
Because why do you have to preface that?
Right. Mhm.
And you can't promise it, right? Like safety is felt, it's not given. So you can't possibly make me feel safe.
Yeah, yeah. And it kind of brings me to, you're currently teaching at Reed.
Mhm.
Uh, it's for the how long have you been at Reed now?
Since August.
Since August, so relatively new.
Mhm.
What you were again doing productions. Obviously, you talked about just COVID coming in and halting a lot of halting
Yes.
or limiting a lot of stuff. But yeah, what made you want to make that transition into going full-time theater education? And also, you know, do you obviously you're able to like work with students, their productions, but as far as just, being in the thick of it yourself, do you obviously it's only been since August, but do you miss it?
Oh gosh, oh, what a question, Bruce. Oh my goodness. So I don't really think of this as a transition per se, because I think I'm not giving up on acting. Having this job as a visiting professor does add complications to my career, right? Because I'm now part of the Actors Equity Union, which means that I'm not able to go to rehearsals because it conflicts with my teaching schedule. So like for a union contract, normally the rehearsal process is Tuesday to Saturday from 10 to 6. That's your rehearsal schedule. It's a full-time job, right? So whenever an actor is in a show, you can assume that they're not doing their other job, because nobody is ever just an actor, not in Portland.
Mm.
They're either unemployed or they're doing a lot of other work in order to supplement their income as an actor. And I think that's a bigger topic to talk about, how like it's not sustainable. Um, and I feel like I am feeling super fulfilled as a professor teaching acting to the students at Reed. I do miss it every day. I miss acting so much, because I think that's my acting is my life force. It's what drives me forward. There's a group of tightrope walkers called the Flying Walandas, and Nick Walanda once said, "Life is on the wire. Everything else is just waiting." And that's how I feel all the time, right? Like as an actor, I'm constantly observing, researching, trying to figure out how I can make these characters more human, more deep, more complex, more relatable every time, right? Like every time I see an amazing performance, I think about that, Every time I watch Viola Davis act, I feel like there's a chemical reaction inside of me, right? Because she's just brilliant. Yeah, I don't know. I think in my dreams, I would love to both be able to help nurture the next group of theater artists coming out, and also be able to act, because I think it's important for my students to see what I can do as a theater artist, to see if what I'm teaching them is actually translating on stage. I think it was when I was in graduate school, I got to see a couple of my professors perform, and that was super insightful, to be like, wow, I love you as a professor, and I don't know if I like you as a performer.
Mm.
Not because they're not great, they're phenomenally skilled, but I feel like certain values they have, I don't necessarily share as a performer. And it's good to know, because I feel like when you're in school, you're learning how to build your aesthetic as an artist, right? You're trying to figure out what kind of an artist you want to be, and how do I manage my time in a way that can make this my living. And yeah, so I miss it every day. I'm also trying to find opportunities to go see shows to support my past and future collaborators, people that I want to collaborate with, and do readings if my schedule allows. I just did a reading a couple weeks ago with Third Rail Repertory Theater. They have a salon reading, which is pretty like, it's more like an invite only sort of stage reading, and it's lovely. And I missed it. It was so fun. Um, and also I got to work with my dream director, one of my dream directors. Their name is Mallory Mirashrafi, and yeah, they're just phenomenal. So it was just such a treat to work with them.
So you said something there about just, no one's just an actor
Right.
in Portland. And I want to dig into that a little bit more in terms of I don't want to do the thing where I ask you solve the problem of making theater more sustainable, but at the same time, do you see I see this just as like a writer where like if I see all this money or this like pot of money, it feels like here, here, and here. And we say we want to see this. We need to pay people to do this. Like I see it all the time. And I wonder just again with like theater, whether it's not just like acting, but in, especially like when we're talking about education spaces, like do you see any just like particular like untapped opportunities where maybe not making theater as a whole more sustainable, but just like places where it's like, we could be having more like whether it's like more artist residencies or more like again, I keep coming back to education and like working, especially with engaging with, like elementary schools, middle schools, and stuff like that.
Um, that's a very hard question. I think we have to be super intentional in what we choose to make, right? Because if we're only doing theater for a specific group of audience, why would anybody else want to invest in that? Right? It kind of
Mhm.
goes back to who are we tailoring our art for? And if we are wanting the younger generation to be a part of it, then we need to already program ways for them to be involved, right? We need to program in our college curriculum these days to go see shows at Portland Center Stage, at the Armory, or at artist repertory theaters, or all these different theater companies, right? Like, because otherwise these students have a lot of work that they already have to do. So asking them to go see a show when they live in Southeast and they have to trek all the way to Southwest or Northeast to see a show at 7:30 and they don't have a car, like how are they supposed to get home safely after when the show gets out at 10 or 10:30? These are the problems, right? Like we can't think of the younger generation as an afterthought. We can't think of the communities of color as an afterthought. How do we make really intentional change, saying that, okay, so this might not be like a quick fix, right? Like this might have to take 5 to 10 years to really fully be robust and sustainable. We need to start now. We need to start thinking about, okay, like we're all asking money from the same donors. How
Mhm.
do we make sure the government is actually invested in the art, right? Like, because the artists were the first people to get let go. We all lost job as soon as the pandemic hit. And that had a huge ripple effect, right? Because all these actors that are traveling to places, so travel agencies really suffered, airlines suffered because nobody was flying because of COVID. Restaurants suffered because all these performers that used to like go to certain restaurants while they're not at home when they're in a different city, all of a sudden they can't go anywhere. Restaurants suffered, like all these industries suffered because art was no longer an option. But where artists are not viewed as essential workers, right? So like if art is not essential, what is essential? Amazon? And I'm not talking about Amazon workers, I'm talking about Amazon as an entity. Is Amazon the only thing that's essential? When Jeff Bezos has so much money, I don't know. These are my questions. I don't know how to answer them, but I feel like we keep trying to put price tag on people's lives and people's lives values, and I don't know if we can do that as a society or as a, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's now we're getting to again a larger discussion, but I I think it's we start trying to imagining what a different world is because there's this the specter of more and more automation just in jobs in general where I don't know like we're like forecasting what employment is going to look like and everything. It's like it's not trending to get better in general. And I was kind of excited a little bit with when there was some discussion about there was more discussion about universal basic income and some of these different ideas as far as like saying what does it look like you know we actually just put it into the policy to take care of people's needs and what can people do otherwise like you know I start thinking about, okay, so what if we have the money to, pay bills and whatnot, and we have the technology to kind of like do a bunch of these things? Does that mean we can have more in the arts? Does that, or even forget, UBI, but like, you know, because we're in the US, it's kind of it's always like we don't talk about, we constantly hear, it's the best country in the world, everything is great, it's magical. And then, you don't hear about things like, yeah, other countries actually like invest in their artists like as a thing. It's like, in theory, we could, again, when we look at these pots of money, it's like we could do that because I just look at it as, again, as a writer, I imagine, especially, when you're engaging with donors all the time, you start seeing like, here are the foundations and kind of like the traditional sources, but you also see a lot of people where you're like, there's so much money out here. Like, as much as, they're struggling, as much as it is a struggle to procure funds, there's also so much money. I mean, you mentioned Jeff Bezos, but even so many of these names that no one is going to know, these people are not celebrities, but there's so much money out here. It's wild. It, that's not a question. I'm getting off into a rant. I'm sorry. But, you know, as part of this interview is just like kind of like trading notes. And it's like, I can't help it. Whenever I talk with other artists, whether it's other writers or people with other disciplines, it always comes back to this. Doesn't it feel like that?
Mhm. I mean, like, because we're always trying to figure out how do we do the thing that activates us like nothing else and not be poor or not
Mhm.
feel like most of our waking hours are more about how do I pay bills instead of how do I dedicate my energy to my art, right? I mean,
Mhm.
my husband is in the music industry, right? Um, he's always like, well, there's a difference when a band is compiled of trust fund artists, right? There's a level of ease where they don't have to worry about stuff that normal people worry about, like car payments, like credit card payments or healthcare. How do I make sure that I budget so I have enough food for however much long, and of course they're successful because they already have that foundation laid out for them, right? But when it's only the selected few, then it makes all the other artists feel like their art is not worthwhile or that their art is not sustainable or in order to really live as a human being and happy and be happy, art is not what they're going to choose. And I don't know how to tell the next generation of artists to be like, really do what you love when I can't promise them a good future, right? Because what you were saying, the future looks a little grim. Like, if am I gonna be replaced by a robot that looks like me? Because I don't know, deep fake or AI art, like so many of these illustrators are freaking out because what we're choosing to feed AI to replace us is years of education, years of hard work, years of heartbreak and trauma to create these beautiful things that makes us more human than ever. And we're trying to replace that because we want convenience. I don't know. I think, you know, Christina Wong, who is an amazing theater artist, she was also a Pulitzer Prize finalist in the drama category. She had talked about how nonprofits are so broken because nonprofits are kind of like codependent with their problem. And that
Mhm.
really like made me feel like, oh my God, yes, you're so right. And also I don't know how to solve that problem, you know? So yes, we can have incredible nonprofits, but what is the goal of that nonprofit, right? Wouldn't you want to cease to exist so that there isn't a problem anymore,
Mhm.
right? So how do we treat art beyond pleasing a specific group of people? I only have questions. I don't have answers.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, kind of in a similar place. It's all these different factors, whether it's, you know, technological innovations, wealth hoarding, just the whims. When you brought up the AI art thing, I try to approach it like not, I don't want to be, what was it, like Buzz Killington about, everyone's fun, but at the same time, it's just like, okay, we all see what's happening here, right? We all like the fact that we are, I don't know, went through the same thing, although again, not a even comparison, but I think of I had a friend who was a taxi driver at sort of like, the beginning of like Uber and everything kind of like really taking off. So, I get these messages about, just like, hey, don't, you're choosing convenience over, and you're putting people who actually like have jobs with some benefits doing this out of work.
Yeah.
Also, as a Black person, I'm thinking, yeah, but the taxi industry has also been like super racist to my community specifically. So it's a hard, the empathy is hard there.
Yeah.
But, again, that you see that move in all these different fields. You see this with art, where on one hand, I'm seeing, artists on social media like saying, you see what you're doing, like this is my craft and you're just kind of like bastardizing it right now with this, do you care? And people being like,
Yeah.
no, this is fun. Look at this, look at 5 different versions of me, this is wonderful. Whoa. And like, it's, I can understand why someone would be like, yeah, I feel kind of hopeless, I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah.
but I mean, I guess the optimist in me says, I was watching something where like, the lawyers of the future, because it was talking about legal stuff in AI, like the lawyers of the future are going to be working with AI. And I'm like, I mean, that sounds great for like, I don't know, 2% of the legal community. I'm not sure that's an answer, but okay.
Yeah.
But
Like, there are things that you're probably not going to be able to get from AI, right? Like,
mm,
because human minds are really complex, and if you don't get all of the evidence from your defendant, then do you accidentally give them a much harsher sentence because the AI lawyer is not asking the right questions? I mean,
mm,
I just I, machines are created by people, right? So these artificial intelligence are still from flawed human intelligence. So I don't I don't know how I
yeah,
feel
yeah.
about because they call it a human error for a reason and not machine error, right? Like machine can malfunction, but it's because of the programming that a human being decided to do. So I don't, yeah, I don't
Mm.
know how I feel about it. I know it is the future, and I'm not saying that I'm against change. I just feel like the robots are gonna kill us.
I mean, probably. But also, the robots are, let's talk about just like racism in the tech industry,
That's-
and who's actually programming most of the stuff and all the biases that are baked in. And yeah, like the short answer is the robots probably are going to kill us. Okay, so it's gonna be a little bit of a tonal swing here, but with this working artist working title project, one of the things I like to ask all my interviewees is, what's something in the world of art that, not a project, not that your words, something in the world of art that you're not working on that is just like exciting you right now, if that makes sense. So, as opposed to like it'd be easy for, if someone's asking me like, Bruce, what's exciting you in the world right now? I'd be like, well, I'm doing this, but like, what's another project? Does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Uh, so since like October to now, I've had the opportunity to go to two world premiere shows by two playwrights that I think the world of. One of them is Carla Ching, and the other one is Lloyd Se, who wrote The Chinese Lady. And their shows are phenomenal. And I'm so glad that they're getting produced. And I'm hoping that these shows will continue to get produced because people need to see them. Carla's play was called Revenge Porn, or The Story of a Body. That's the full title. and Lloyd's play, which just opened on February 10th. Is that February 10th? Wow, okay, yeah, February 10th. Um, it's called The Heart Sellers. That's specifically about the Heart Seller Act. So it's kind of like his like American history genre of plays, historical fictions that get people to understand why people would want to come to America. Um, and I'm just so moved by these incredible artists who are not even a decade older than me most of the time, and they have endured so much more than I have as an artist, and specifically an Asian artist in this industry. And they're still able to feel hopeful. Hopefully they feel hopeful, but I feel hopeful watching their shows anyway. And they still feel like what they do is meaningful. And that's something that I really strive to become as well. You know, I just wish I can become these incredible artists that I admire, because their art makes me feel like a better person every time I see
Mm.
it. I don't
Mm.
know if that's the
Uh,
question that you asked me. I think
That 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 is absolutely the answer. And I'll just say, as an interviewer, you really stuck the landing on there too. So thank you for that.
thank you.
But yeah, with that, Barbie, thank you again for taking the time to talk with me this afternoon. And before we go, just wanted to give you a chance to promote anything if you got. I know the casting director for Mother of Color, which is out now. I'm not sure if you want to talk about that a little bit, but yeah, if you have that or any other projects you'd like people to know about, please do share.
Thank you so much for just making me feel so seen and loved, Bruce. I just think you're the coolest. Yeah, I was the casting director for Mother of Color, and I think we just had a screening at Cinema 21, like either yesterday or a couple days ago. And I think our director and some of our producers were there too. And I don't know if there's another Portland screening again soon, but please look out for it if you are interested in Mother of Color. You can find the social media handle, like if you just put in Mother of Color on Instagram, and you can see like trailers up there. And I'm
Can you
also
just talk a little bit about what the film is for those who aren't familiar?
yeah. So Mother of Color, it's about Noelia, who who is a woman that's working in the city government sort of field in Portland, and she is a single mother and she has two little ones, and she's trying so hard to fulfill her dream as someone that can really make a difference in the city of Portland, while trying to figure out and juggle her life as a mother and not feeling like any of her work opportunities have provided any sort of childcare opportunities to make her feel at ease, or make her feel like she can float above water just for a second to really be her fullest self. Yeah, so you get to see this incredible woman, this ordinary and extraordinary woman trying to do something for herself and for the society. And I think it's a beautiful, beautiful film. I'm really proud of my cast. And so much of the casting was also supported by my producers and my director. You know, everybody helped me to, for this first time casting director, to feel, you know, successful. And I'm just so grateful for everyone that has helped supported me and my journey as a casting director for that film. I really love that film, and we have some incredible cast members in the movie you'll see, so I don't want to spoil anything for anybody. And I'm also the director for a production going on at Reed Theater. It's called The Last Croissant by Veronica Joe, and it's happening April 20th, April 22nd, 21st, and the April 22nd. It's only 3 shows, but I'm super excited about it. I think my cast and production team are just absolutely amazing, and yeah, I'm just so grateful, and I feel so privileged to be working with
Awesome, awesome. Well, yeah, that last croissant. I'm sorry. It's not that I'm also having to be hungry at the moment, so that kind of like speaks to me more. But yeah, definitely for those watching, please be on the lookout, check that out. And yeah, Barbie Woo, thank you again for taking the time and keep up the great work.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for being you, Bruce.
Thank you.